He didn't even look up when he tossed the binder, just flicked it off the table like it was a used napkin. Landed spine first on the floor, cracked like a gunshot. 20 years of audit cross-references, quarterly risk logs, and signatures from 6 different executives, now sliding across the carpet like roadkill. That's when I knew I was invisible, not metaphorically. Not in a my voice isn't heard in meetings kind of way. No, I was a literal ghost to this man. Brad, new CFO, MBA from somewhere expensive, skin-tight button-up and teeth that looked bleached with vengeance. Let me rewind just enough to give you context before I hand you the scalpel. I'm Maria. I've worked at Ravelin Systems since flip phones were high-tech and internal emails still started with Dear. I was the one who remembered everyone's birthday, even Glenn in facilities who's allergic to eye contact. I kept spreadsheets like they were living things. Color-coded, cross-stabbed, with footnotes so sharp you could shave with them. People joked I ran on toner and decaf. I didn't mind, I liked my corner. I liked being reliable, predictable, boring. My department was audit and risk management, which basically meant we were the human fire extinguisher for corporate dumpster fires. Not sexy, not fast, but necessary. We tracked vendor compliance, contract variances, procurement integrity, the kind of stuff that made salespeople yawn and regulators salivate. For 20 years, I worked like the apocalypse was scheduled for Thursday at 3 p.m., and maybe, deep down, I thought all that preparation would matter. Spoiler, it didn't. Brad arrived 6 months ago, walked into the Monday budget review with his oat milk latte, no notepad, and a permanent smirk like he'd already solved the company's problems in his head during CrossFit. He was charming in that dangerous way, used your first name like a weapon, and called glaring omissions learning moments. He started saying things like optics and strategic realignment. Translation: he wanted to cut heads and pose for LinkedIn about it. Look, before we go deeper, I just gotta say this. If you're listening to this and you've made it this far, take half a second and tap that little subscribe button. Like the story if it's making your blood simmer. It really helps our team keep digging up these corporate horror shows and lets the algorithm know justice still sells. Otherwise, you're just ghosting us like Brad ghosted ethics training. Back to the scene of the crime. So Brad's on this warpath, right? He calls an efficiency sprint across departments, which is code for let's pretend we're innovating, while firing people who make more than $60K. Our team gets pulled into a meeting we weren't on the invite list for. He flips through my audit binder mid-sentence, while I'm explaining vendor discrepancies, literally interrupts me to ask why we still use physical binders. I tell him federal procurement still requires hard copy backups for certain contracts, clause 12.4. He raises his eyebrows like I just told him I churn butter in the parking lot. This is all fluff, he mutters, right there, out loud, in front of my team, my binders, my labeled tabs, my blood pressure by spreadsheet children. Fluff, I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because the pressure in my skull was starting to feel like a kettle about to scream. No one else laughed, just that awkward HR smile silence. Over the next few weeks, I saw the writing on the wall in Comic Sans. My team was being consolidated. Risk items weren't being logged anymore. Vendor variances, some that could trigger federal audits, were getting massaged. And the compliance review Brad promised in Q2 quietly vanished. Still, I kept working, quietly, thoroughly. I updated backups, cross-checked signatures, and prepared my own little insurance policy. Because I knew men like Brad. They treat old systems like dead weight. They think rules are suggestions and whistleblowers are fairy tales told to interns. I didn't confront him, didn't push. Just logged, documented, filed. Because the one thing Fluff is good at, catching fire. It started during a routine quarterly review, the kind of soul-sucking meeting where you watch your colleagues' avatars die slowly on a Teams call while someone stumbles through a slide deck titled Q3 Synergy Alignment. I was walking through a variance report on subcontractor payments, just a couple line items that didn't match up with our previous contracts. Nothing major, but worth a flag. Mid-sentence, Brad leaned back in his chair like he was about to get a pedicure, reached over, grabbed my report, flipped through it like he was scanning a diner menu, and muttered more to himself than anyone else, "This is all fluff." I stopped speaking. Not because I was finished, but because he'd said it loud enough for the entire room to hear, but soft enough to pretend he hadn't meant for anyone to react. It was a surgical humiliation, and the silence that followed was clinical. Fluff, my audit, my analysis, my annotated red flags on duplicate billing, reduced to pillow stuffing. He didn't stop there. In the next leadership sync, he actually used the phrase legacy overhead when referring to audit and risk, called us a department stuck in a pre-cloud mentality. He said this while mispronouncing procurement and confusing Sarbanes-Oxley with a Game of Thrones character. I didn't respond, not because I agreed, but because I was studying him. The way he spoke in absolutes, the way his fingers danced around questions like they were landmines, the way he talked about streamlining compliance into a dashboard like that would stop a federal audit. The truth is, I could have screamed, could have rattled off 10 CFR codes that would have made him wet himself. But you don't bring a flamethrower to a room full of kindling. You wait. So that night, I stayed late. I took out the last 12 months of vendor invoices and payment logs and started cross-referencing them. Not the reports the system spit out, the raw files. The actual documents we kept archived in what Brad called the apocalypse closet. At first, it was small. One subcontractor logged for a drone diagnostic module billed twice in the same month, once from their Ohio HQ and once from a Delaware PO box. Same amount, same invoice number, different timestamps. Odd. Then I saw it again, this time with a radar subcomponent vendor. Identical deliverables, billed under two different work order IDs, both marked approved by exec override. No attached justification. My skin went cold, not just because it smelled like fraud, but because the signatures had changed. We used to route high-risk approvals through legal or internal controls. Now it looked like Brad had built a shortcut, project managers pushing things through with blanket overrides, no logs, no review, just rubber stamps and prayer. And here's the thing about fraud. It never shows up in bold red ink. It whispers through the details. It hides in version history, so I started digging deeper. I pulled archived files from 3 years back. Checked vendor histories, payment patterns, contract durations. I didn't have to look far. The discrepancies multiplied. Vendor name misspellings that created duplicates in the system. Projects that were billed before contracts were even signed. Change orders that should have gone to legal routed through Brad's assistant instead. I wasn't sure what I was looking at yet, malicious intent or just Olympic-level incompetence. But I knew this: if someone from the Office of Federal Procurement Integrity ever looked at this mess, they'd have a field day. And for the first time in a long time, I felt dangerous. Not in a set the place on fire kind of way, but in that quiet, surgical, Cold War spy kind of way. I wasn't Fluff. I was the archive, the ghost in the machine, the receipts. I printed what I needed, dated everything, logged discrepancies in a folder I labeled for later. Because if Brad wanted to play fast and loose with compliance, he just picked the wrong librarian to ignore. They scheduled the meeting for 9:07 a.m., not 9 o'clock, not 9:15. 9:07, like they were trying to sound casual about ruining someone's life. I'd barely sat down in the glass box HR calls a wellness room before I knew. There was a folder on the table, the kind with the logo watermark and just enough legal padding to make it feel sanitary. Brad sat across from me, legs crossed, smiling like a man about to cancel someone's grandmother and still make his tea time. HR was beside him, lips pursed like she just sucked on a lemon soaked in regret. Maria, Brad began with the performative sigh of someone pretending this was hard for him. This is never easy. Oh, I'm sure it's not. Right between your collagen shots and quarterly stock options. We've been evaluating redundancies, he said, and given your tenure, we wanted to offer a dignified transition. Dignified, that's what they call it now when they're too cowardly to say fired. No misconduct, of course, HR piped in like a malfunctioning GPS. It's strictly a structural decision. A strategic pivot, the same way a guillotine pivots. Brad leaned forward, hands steepled like some kind of startup monk. We're offering a generous severance. 2 months, full COBRA extension, and your PTO paid out. We just ask that you keep things graceful. As in, don't flip the table. Don't tell accounting about the vendor fraud. Don't walk down the hallway screaming you're all driving a burning bus. And then, just as I was trying to hold back the bile in my throat, Brad did it. He reached behind him, grabbed one of my audit binders off the side table, read the spine, Q4 vendor certs / Brad override sign-offs, and casually tossed it into the shred bin beside him. No ceremony, no apology, just a soft plunk like the sound a life makes when it's being erased in real time. That was the moment the room split into two timelines. In one, I said nothing, signed the severance, and walked out with my little box of potted plants and expired birthday cards. In the other, the one I chose, I stood up slowly, nodded like the good soldier they thought I was, and took the folder without a word. Brad extended his hand. I ignored it, walked past him, let the silence thicken like smoke, but just before I reached the hallway, I stopped, turned back into the audit suite. No one tried to stop me. No one even looked up. Ghosts don't cause concern. I opened the bottom drawer of my old cabinet. Behind the labeled rows of binders, beneath the legacy vendor non-active section, was one binder I'd slid into place 2 weeks earlier. I'd labeled it innocuously, Q2 Crosswalk Supply Chain, but inside was everything. Emails, invoices, snapshots of overwritten logs, printouts of approvals that had mysteriously disappeared from our internal system. Even a hard copy of the old compliance charter, the one Brad never bothered to read, highlighted and bookmarked, with clause 14.6 circled in red ink like a sniper dot. I slid the binder into my tote bag like a surgeon packing a scalpel. The walk to the elevator was long, quiet. I passed the marketing team clustered around a ring light, rehearsing some recruitment video script. I passed the kitchen where the free snacks had recently been optimized into a sad tray of beige protein bars. Nobody noticed. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. The doors closed, and only then did I let the corner of my mouth lift. Just a twitch, not a smile, something smaller, meaner. They thought they'd deleted me. What they didn't know was I'd already exported the receipts. Back home, the silence hit different. No pings, no Outlook reminders, no drive-by drop-ins from procurement pretending their screw-ups weren't their fault. Just me, a folding table, and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding against 2 decades of routine suddenly gone. I gave myself a day. One day to feel the weight of it, to sit in sweatpants, drink flat coffee, and let the humiliation settle like dust on a forgotten desk. I didn't cry. I'm not wired that way. But I did stare at the binder, the one I'd salvaged like it was radioactive, because it was. And then I got to work. I pulled every backup I'd squirreled away over the years. External drives, flash sticks, even some printed files I kept because something about them smelled wrong. I wasn't hoarding out of paranoia. I was preserving because when you've been around long enough, you stop trusting the system to keep anything inconvenient alive. I opened a fresh manila envelope, the kind you only use for legal mail or revenge. On my dining table, I built the packet like a forensic architect. 3 years of internal audit flags that were never escalated. Vendor approval forms with override signatures that didn't match the original logs. Email threads where legal asked for clarification and were ghosted. I didn't editorialize. I didn't dramatize. I just connected the dots. Let the paper do the screaming. At the center of it all was Clause 14.6 of the Legacy Compliance Charter, printed on thick paper and annotated in red ink. Most folks at Ravelin didn't even know it existed. It was a holdover from when the company first started bidding on federal contracts. An obscure clause buried in a predigitization appendix that no one had updated because it was grandfathered in. Clause 14.6. Any documented violations or suspected violations of procurement integrity shall be reportable to the Office of Federal Procurement Integrity via sealed packet, with full whistleblower protection per the 1994 Federal Charter Act. It was old, dusty, ugly, but still enforceable. I wrote the cover letter by hand, signed it, dated it, no accusations, just the facts in the clause. I included my contact info and cited my termination date just to establish timing. Then I sealed the envelope, not email, not upload, sealed, stamped. I took it to the post office at 7:45 a.m., the moment they opened, and mailed it priority with a signature requirement. As I stood at the counter, watching the clerk slide it into the outgoing bin, I felt something weird. Not vindication, not hope. Focus. Meanwhile, back at Ravelin, Brad was having his moment. I still had access to the public-facing company newsletter. They hadn't unsubscribed me yet, bless their souls. There he was, front and center in the latest issue. Ravelin poised to secure largest federal renewal in company history. Brad, smiling like a man who thinks cologne is a personality, holding a branded coffee mug that read "Make Metrics Matter." The renewal was worth hundreds of millions. Long-term, multi-agency. The kind of deal that got you on a panel at some defense tech summit in Vegas. He called it his signature win. He quoted strategic innovation through agile compliance. Whatever the hell that means, I read every word, twice. And then I went back to the binder, checked dates, refreshed timelines, labeled one more folder if they call, because I didn't know when or even if the Office of Federal Procurement Integrity would follow up. But I knew this much: if they did, I'd be ready. And Brad, he'd be so very not. It took 4 months. 4 months of silence, punctuated only by the occasional forwarded article from old coworkers, usually with subject lines like "Guess who's keynote speaker at the compliance conference?" face with rolling eyes. Brad was making the rounds, smiling, shaking hands, calling himself a champion of modernization. There was even a podcast. I listened to 5 minutes of it before my blood pressure tried to secede from my body. In the meantime, I did what women like me do best. I adapted. I took on a few consulting gigs. Smaller firms, couple defense-adjacent startups who were terrified of screwing up their first federal audit. I helped them build risk frameworks, taught them how not to make the same mistakes Ravelin made on purpose. It paid the bills, kept my brain sharp, and more importantly, kept me out of the fetal position. But every time the mail arrived or my phone buzzed with an unknown number, I'd feel that prickle in the back of my neck. That sense that something was moving, slowly, under the surface. Then one Monday morning it came, an email, no subject line, just a sender, W. Davies at PFCI.gov, and a single line in the body. "Miss Alvarez, your materials have been reviewed. I'd like to meet." We scheduled it for the following Thursday. Downtown, Federal Building, Room 4B. I wore a gray blazer, no makeup, and carried the same binder I'd salvaged from the shred bin, like a priest holding a relic no one believes in anymore. The man who met me was late 40s, pressed shirt, eyes that missed nothing. He introduced himself as William Davies, Federal Procurement Compliance Investigator. He shook my hand once, firm and brief, and opened with, "I've been doing this job 16 years. I've never seen documentation like yours." He said documentation like it was a compliment. We sat. He flipped through the binder with a reverence I wasn't used to seeing. Paused a tab marked Override Discrepancies 2022. Read a few lines, whistled low. "You didn't just send us smoke," he said. "You sent us blueprints to the fire." I didn't gloat, didn't lean forward, just nodded. He asked a few questions. Nothing accusatory, just clarifying things like timestamps, signatory roles, which systems Ravelin used to store invoice metadata. It felt less like a deposition and more like two codebreakers comparing notes. And then, just as we were wrapping up, he said it. We're opening a discrete review, not public, yet. But if the discrepancies you flagged match what we're starting to see in contract requisitions and payment trails, this won't stay quiet for long. I didn't smile, but my spine straightened half an inch. Brad, meanwhile, was throwing a party. I saw it on LinkedIn the next day. Ravelin's internal celebration for securing federal renewal through bold leadership and innovative compliance solutions. There he was again, grinning with a slice of sheet cake in one hand and a gold balloon arch behind him. I zoomed in. The cake said seal the deal. They don't even try to hide the arrogance. I closed the browser, opened a fresh notepad, and began organizing a secondary folder, post-submission follow-up. If Davies called again, and I knew he would, I wanted to be 10 steps ahead. Because I could feel it now, the tremor in the ground. The storm was gathering, and this time I wasn't just ready. I was the one holding the lightning rod. They didn't knock on Ravelin's door with a battering ram. They slid in through the side, quiet, cold, surgical. 2 weeks after my meeting with Davies, I received a secure call. Unlisted number. Voice print verification. That kind of call, Maria. We're moving forward. No preamble, no dramatics, just those 4 words and the unmistakable shift in air pressure you feel when the temperature drops before a storm breaks. We're launching a formal inquiry. Preliminary comparisons confirm significant irregularities, some financial, some procedural. We'll need your help, and don't worry, you're protected. Legal cover, full confidentiality. I didn't answer right away. I just stood in my living room, barefoot, staring at my coffee going cold on the counter. It was happening. The regulators had started matching my documentation, the Fluff, remember, to current procurement records, payment logs, and signed work orders submitted as part of the federal renewal package. And guess what? Nothing lined up. Projects that were approved for $1.2 million had somehow ballooned to $2.40, same deliverables, same contractors. Timelines shifted mid-contract with no documentation. Authorization forms bore digital signatures from people who weren't even with the company anymore. One name kept appearing under executive override approval. Brad, over and over. Davies didn't say it outright, but I could hear it in his voice. This wasn't just a slap-on-the-wrist situation. This was multiple violations, layered fraud, kind of systemic rot that makes federal auditors start circling like buzzards with badges. We'll be interviewing internal stakeholders soon, he added. You'll remain external, but we may need you to verify specific chains of documentation, especially on the 2022 radar procurement cycle and the drone diagnostic split billing. My stomach flipped at that, not from fear but from the sheer scale of it. I'd flagged those specific transactions, quietly, internally, years ago, and I'd been ignored. Buried under quarterly reviews, candy-coated feedback, and the dismissive assurance that it's already been handled. No, Brad, it hadn't. Now it was unraveling. The investigation wasn't just a spreadsheet matchup anymore. It had teeth. It had legs. It had subpoenas. I started receiving encrypted drop links from the office, scanned internal documents, metadata timestamps, PDF logs they wanted me to verify. I worked through them slowly, methodically, marking each anomaly like I was back in my old cubicle, except this time there was no Brad breathing down my neck. No HR waiting to hand me a severance folder and a Kleenex. I was still technically just consulting, but the language shifted. They started referring to me as special external reviewer. My old badge might have been shredded, but now I had something better, authority without chains. That week, I barely slept, not because I was afraid, but because my brain wouldn't stop connecting dots. One vendor showed duplicate billing under 2 different project codes, each routed through different finance reps, both of whom had supposedly verified scope completion. But the delivery logs were identical, down to the timestamp. Another showed retroactive change orders added after payment dispersed, digitally inserted 3 months post-deadline. It was everywhere, not incompetence. Pattern. Brad had built a shortcut, a fast pass through compliance. Probably pitched it as lean process management or some other Silicon Valley word salad. But underneath the buzzwords was old-school fraud dressed up in PowerPoint. I submitted my verified notes back to Davies with annotated timestamps, cross-referenced with archived org charts. His only reply, you just gave us enough to expand jurisdiction. This may go criminal. I closed my laptop and sat back. For a moment, fear crept in. Not for myself, I was covered, but for the collateral damage. The junior analysts who'd approved what they were told to approve. The assistants whose names were forged into audit logs. I didn't want blood. I wanted accountability, but at this level, they often come hand in hand. Still, I kept working. Quiet, focused, obsessed, because the walls were closing in on Brad, and this time I wasn't the one being shown the door. It came on a Thursday, 10:02 a.m. Subject line, urgent, all hands compliance review mandatory attendance, no explanation. No agenda, just a sudden, out-of-the-blue calendar invite sent to every active employee at Ravelin Systems, VPs, department heads, finance, legal, and one additional recipient, me. Not to my old work email, that was long dead. It came to my consulting inbox, the one I used for federal engagements, from a Gov domain, signed off by a federal coordinator. Maria Alvarez, External Compliance Consultant, Federal Procurement Oversight Committee. I stared at it for a long minute, not because I was shocked, but because the symmetry was so precise it almost felt scripted. The same company that had tossed my binder like garbage was now pulling up a chair for me at the table because the table was on fire. I accepted the invite, no comment, no email, no emoji. Then I got to work. The Zoom was set for 2 p.m. I had 4 hours. I pulled my archived copies, the vendor variance logs, the override spreadsheets, the signature trail PDFs, all color-coded, all dated, all meticulously cross-referenced. I opened the Legacy Compliance Charter, page 17, clause 14.6. I highlighted it again, not because it needed more emphasis, but because I wanted it glowing on my desk like a holy relic. I dressed plainly. Neutral tones, clean hair, no makeup, not for humility, for contrast. Let them come in full panic mode, sweating in overpriced suits, fumbling their words, clutching empty talking points like rosary beads. I would be calm, I would be complete. By 1:45, I was logged in, camera off, waiting. Participants trickled in like raindrops before a hurricane, over 100 names. Legal, finance, procurement. Brad's name appeared, of course, Bradley M., CFO, followed by the company's GC, the coup, and 3 people from external legal I didn't recognize. Then, 5 minutes before the hour, a new name entered. William Davies, OFB lead auditor, and next to his name, the seal of the Office of Federal Procurement Integrity. Silence, not the usual pre-meeting chatter, just a tension you could feel through fiber optics. At exactly 2 o'clock, Davies turned on his camera. He looked the same, sharp suit, eyes that missed nothing. He cleared his throat. Good afternoon. This meeting has been scheduled as part of a formal procurement integrity review in accordance with federal oversight procedures tied to Contract Renewal 7040G 2269. Dead silence. He continued. Some of you may be aware of recent discrepancies identified during routine cross-verification of vendor and procurement documentation. Others may be less aware. Today's meeting is to provide clarity and introduce the scope of the investigation now underway. No one breathed. He clicked share screen. The first document he pulled up was a vendor approval log. My version, my annotation, my audit trail. This report, Davies said, was part of a sealed submission made under Clause 14.6 of your company's compliance charter. This clause, for those unfamiliar, allows direct reporting to our office in cases of suspected fraud or mismanagement within the procurement process. Someone muted themselves mid-cough. I sat motionless, camera still off, listening. Brad's camera flicked on briefly, then off again. A flicker of movement. No words. Davies wasn't finished. The origin of this submission is irrelevant to today's meeting, he said, a lie, and everyone knew it. What is relevant is that the documentation provided has been verified against active contract requisitions submitted for your recent federal renewal bid. He clicked again. The screen filled with a side-by-side comparison. Original vendor approval vs. the altered one Ravelin had submitted. Mismatch. Next slide. Mismatch. Another. Duplicate billing. Falsified signature. Out-of-sequence change orders. Mismatch. The data didn't speak, it screamed. I turned on mic. Not for drama, for clarity. One of the directors gasped quietly. I saw legal whispering to someone off-screen. Davies didn't react, but his tone changed slightly, steeled now, not just formal but final. I'd like to introduce Miss Maria Alvarez, he said, our external compliance consultant who has been assisting in document verification. Miss Alvarez served as the internal audit lead for this organization for 20 years. He didn't need to say more, everyone knew. Brad sat frozen, camera still off, microphone muted. The man who called my work Fluff was now staring down the barrel of the very binders he tried to destroy. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk, just nodded. Once, I'm here, I said. Let me know where you'd like to begin, because this wasn't revenge. It was an audit, and I was the reckoning. Davies didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm cut through the call sharper than any accusation ever could. As part of our preliminary findings, he began, we've identified 17 confirmed instances of procurement irregularities within the last fiscal year, 12 of which involve executive override without appropriate documentation, 6 of which include backdated approvals, and 4, at this stage, that appear to meet the federal threshold for investigative escalation. He clicked. Slide after slide lit up the screen. Internal approval forms missing signatures, vendor payment logs altered timestamp metadata, audit trails showing deletions that should have required 2-person verification but had none. Each slide was timestamped, linked, verified. Every few seconds he paused, giving the room just long enough to sink deeper into the quiet dread collecting like mold in their lungs. Then he clicked again, and that's when the real silence fell. A familiar document appeared, not a spreadsheet, not a system-generated log. It was a scanned page, grainy but legible. My handwriting. My notes in blue ink. Tab 6, Radar Component B/Q4 Compliance Crosswalk. The label on the bottom corner was unmistakable. I'd written it in black Sharpie on a white tab 6 years ago. You could even see the edge of the post-it where I'd flagged a signature mismatch. He clicked again, another scanned page, this time with 3 initials highlighted. Then another, until finally he spoke. This material, he said, voice perfectly level, was described by your CFO as fluff. The sentence hit like a fire alarm in a church. Brad's camera was still off, his mic still muted, but in the bottom corner of the screen his little profile icon flickered. He was still there, still watching. Still breathing, probably too loudly for his own comfort. No one came to his defense. Not legal, not HR, not the board chair. Not one person said a word, because what was there to say? The fluff had timestamps. The fluff had receipts. The fluff had been preserved, cataloged, and submitted through the one channel Brad never bothered to delete from the charter. Davies zoomed in on one of the pages. The notation in my handwriting read, Vendor ID 0493 appears twice under separate work orders, same invoice number. Ladies and gentlemen, he continued, this single notation led us to uncover an estimated $1.3 million in double billing. Since then, we've identified similar patterns across multiple contracts. He let that hang there. No drama, just devastation. Someone exhaled loudly, a shaky breath, maybe from legal. Then came the slow shuffle of someone turning off their camera. Another name blinked out, then another, like passengers abandoning a ship before it fully lists. Still, Brad remained silent. His silence was a confession without punctuation. I kept my eyes on the screen, my expression unreadable. I wasn't there for satisfaction. That moment had passed. This was the consequence. Brad had underestimated 2 things, the memory of a woman labeled redundant and the weight of a well-organized binder. Davies clicked one final time. A screenshot of an internal Slack message appeared, dated 3 months before my termination. From Brad M. Finance exec chat, just get audit off our backs. No one reads that crap anyway. It's all fluff. And there it was. The motive, the mindset, the message. In 24 words, he disqualified himself. Davies let the image sit on the screen like a tombstone. He didn't look smug. He looked tired, like a man who'd seen this story too many times. But for me, it was the first time. The first time I wasn't the one explaining, justifying, defending. Now it was their turn. And the evidence? The evidence wasn't in their systems. It was in my handwriting. Davies leaned forward just slightly, like a man lowering the volume before dropping a bomb. His voice changed, still calm, but now with the kind of edge you hear from a surgeon before the incision. It's not fluff, he said, every word sharp and slow. It's evidence. Click. The shared screen changed. A single PDF filled the view. Procurement invoice. Radar subcomponent. Line items broken down. Total, $483,000. And at the bottom, digitally stamped, dated, traceable, Brad's signature. Approved under executive override. 2 problems: 1, the vendor listed didn't exist in the verified contractor registry, and 2, the work order number matched an already paid invoice 3 months prior. Duplicate payment, falsified credentials, no supporting documentation. Brad's name, right there, staring back at us like a confession carved in glass. A full 3 seconds passed before anyone breathed. Then the board chair's camera blinked off. Legal's feed dropped. Someone unmuted, murmured Jesus Christ, then vanished. And Brad just sat there. Camera on, mic muted, staring at himself. His own face reflected back at him from the bottom corner of the Zoom window, pale and twitching, like he couldn't decide if this was a nightmare or a glitch. He didn't move, didn't speak because there was nothing left to say. Davies let the moment hang. A silence so loud it felt like static. Then finally I unmuted, just one click. I'm happy to assist further if needed, I said quietly. And if you'd like, I still have the backup drives. I paused, looked directly into the camera. They're color-coded as always. No reaction, just that awful, sterile silence. Brad blinked once, then twice, still said nothing. Davies nodded once. This concludes today's review. Next steps will be communicated through legal channels. The screen went black, call ended, and just like that, 20 years of being invisible were over. I didn't cry, didn't fist pump, didn't pour a glass of wine. I simply shut my laptop, turned to the stack of folders on my table, and opened the next case file. Because 1 hour later the email came in, Maria, we'd like to retain you moving forward as an external consultant. Long-term, flexible terms. You'll lead. Turns out all that fluff, it was the foundation. They just never bothered to read it. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.